Khalid Al-Fayed, one of Dubai's most powerful Arab executives, was about to marry into royalty. His wedding to Layla Hassan, the daughter of a wealthy sheikh, was the event of the year. The venue sparkled with gold and silk, guests arrived in designer attire, and paparazzi lined the entrance. But little did Khalid know, his life was about to change forever. Amal, a hardworking African maid, had taken extra shifts at the wedding to send money home to her sick mother. She had always dreamed of more, but in a world of wealth and power, she was invisible. That is, until fate intervened. Layla, the bride, was nowhere to be found. And in a rushed effort to keep the ceremony on schedule, a grave mistake was made. Covered in a traditional wedding veil, Amal was ushered into the bridal chamber, completely unaware of what was happening. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly until it was time for Khalid to lift the veil. As he did, gasps echoed across the hall. Standing before him was not his bride. It was Amal. For a moment, time stood still. Khalid Al-Fayed, one of the most powerful Arab executives, had just uncovered the face of a stranger, a simple African maid, where his bride should have been. The murmurs turned to whispers, then to outrage. What is the meaning of this? Sheikh Hassan thundered, his voice echoing through the grand hall. Amal's hands trembled. She had no idea how she ended up here. She tried to step back, but Khalid's grip tightened on her wrist. His sharp gaze bore into her, searching for answers. But she had none. Just then, the real bride arrived, breathless and furious. What is this nonsense? Who is she? Layla demanded, pointing at Amal like she was nothing more than an insect. Amal opened her mouth to explain, but what could she say? That she was dragged here by accident? That she had no idea how this happened? Before she could utter a word, Khalid raised a hand, silencing everyone. His expression was unreadable. Then he spoke. "She is my wife now," he declared. Gasps filled the room once more. "Khalid, this is madness." Layla shrieked. But Khalid was a man of his word. The moment he said Kabul, "I accept," before witnesses, the marriage was legally binding. Breaking it now would bring public disgrace to his powerful family. He turned to his furious in-laws. "A mistake was made, but I will not be humiliated today." Then he looked at Amal. "From this moment on, you are my wife." Amal's breath caught in her throat. What had just happened? The wedding was over, but the nightmare had just begun. Amal sat in stunned silence in the back of the Rolls-Royce, her hands clenched in her lap. Across from her sat Khalid Al-Fayed, her husband, the man who had just turned her world upside down. He hadn't spoken a word since leaving the venue. His jaw was tight, his fingers tapping impatiently against his knee. The tension in the air was suffocating. Finally, he turned to her, his deep voice cutting through the silence. "You will speak to no one about what happened tonight. Do you understand?" Amal's heart pounded. "But this was a mistake," she whispered. "I can't be your wife." His gaze darkened. "You are my wife now, and I don't deal in mistakes." As the car pulled up to the estate, Amal's breath caught. She had never seen such wealth up close. Marble floors, golden chandeliers, an army of servants lined up at the entrance. But before she could take it all in, a voice rang out. "You brought her here?" Amal turned, only to see a strikingly beautiful woman descending the grand staircase. It was Khalid's mother, Queen Yasmin Al-Fayed, and the look in her eyes made one thing clear. She would never accept Amal as her son's wife. Dinner that night was an unbearable silence. Khalid barely acknowledged Amal's presence. The servants whispered as they served her, throwing curious glances her way. Amal wanted to scream. She didn't belong here. But just as she was about to speak, Khalid set down his glass and finally looked at her. "You will stay here until I decide what to do with you," he said coldly. Amal's stomach twisted. What did that mean? Was she a prisoner? A mistake he was trying to erase? One thing was certain. She was trapped in a world she didn't understand, married to a man who didn't want her, but who couldn't let her go. And somewhere in the shadows, Layla and her family were already plotting their revenge. Amal should have felt lucky. She was now the wife of Khalid Al-Fayed, one of the richest Arab executives in the world. But instead, she felt like a prisoner. Her marriage was a mistake, a joke to everyone in the household. Khalid had not spoken to her since dinner. The staff avoided eye contact. And worst of all, she wasn't allowed to leave the estate. She was trapped in a golden cage. The next morning, she was summoned to Khalid's office. He didn't even look at her as he spoke. "This marriage is a formality," he said coldly. "You will live here, but don't mistake this for anything real." Amal swallowed hard. "Then why keep me here? Let me go." Khalid turned, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Because breaking this marriage now would be a humiliation I cannot afford." His voice lowered. "And I don't tolerate humiliation." Amal felt a shiver run down her spine. This man was dangerous. Later that evening, Amal stepped outside for fresh air, her mind spinning. That's when she heard it, the rustle of footsteps behind her. Before she could react, a hand clamped over her mouth, dragging her into the shadows. A voice whispered into her ear, "You don't belong here, African girl." Panic surged through her. She struggled, heart pounding, just as a deep, furious voice thundered across the courtyard. "Let her go." Khalid. His presence was electric, radiating authority. The attacker immediately released Amal and fled into the darkness. Amal collapsed, gasping. Khalid caught her before she could fall, his strong arms wrapping around her. For the first time, there was something in his eyes other than cold indifference. Rage. Protection. And something even more dangerous. Possession. The attack changed everything. For weeks, Khalid had treated Amal as if she didn't exist, just a woman trapped in a marriage neither of them wanted. But that night, when he caught her in his arms, something shifted. He was furious. Not just at the intruder, but at himself. And now, Amal wasn't just an inconvenience. She was a liability. The next morning, Khalid made an announcement. "From now on, you will have a personal guard." His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. Amal frowned. "I don't need a guard." Khalid's jaw tightened. "You do. And you will follow the rules of this house. No wandering outside without permission. No talking to the staff about what happened." Amal stared at him, frustration burning in her chest. "I'm not your prisoner." Khalid's eyes darkened. "You are my wife. And until I decide otherwise, that means your safety is my concern." There was something unsettling about the way he said it, as if she belonged to him now. Days passed, and Amal grew restless. She needed to understand the man she was married to, the man who held her fate in his hands. One night, while Khalid was away on business, she found her way into his private office. What she found made her blood run cold. A file. Her file. Detailed information about her life, her sick mother, her work history, even her childhood. Why would Khalid have this? And how long had he been watching her? A shadow moved behind her. "You shouldn't be here." Amal turned sharply, only to find Khalid standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. For the first time, she realized the truth. She wasn't just in danger from the people outside this house. She was in danger from the man she had married. Amal's hands trembled as she held the file. Pages filled with details about her life, things she had never told anyone. She looked up, her heart pounding. "Why do you have this?" Khalid stepped forward, his face unreadable. "Because I needed to know who you were." Her chest tightened. "Why?" "You didn't even know I existed before that wedding." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Didn't I?" Amal's stomach twisted. There was something in his voice, something she didn't understand. But before she could push further, Khalid's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "Stay here," he ordered before walking out. But Amal had no intention of obeying. Following him silently, she stopped near the study, pressing herself against the wall. Inside, Khalid spoke in hushed tones. "This isn't up for negotiation," he said coldly. "The deal stands, whether they like it or not." A pause. Then a sharp intake of breath. "They touched her? That was a mistake." Amal's pulse quickened. Was he talking about the attack? And why did it sound like he was threatening someone? She was about to step back when she felt a hand grab her wrist. What did I tell you about wandering? Khalid's voice was low, dangerous. Amal swallowed hard. Who are you talking to? His grip tightened slightly before he let her go. No one you need to worry about. But I am worried, she shot back. Who are you protecting me from, Khalid? For a moment, something flickered in his gaze, something raw. Then he exhaled, rubbing his temple. You don't understand the world you've been pulled into, Amal. There are people who will use you against me. Her brows furrowed. Why would they use me? His silence was deafening. Then, quietly, he said, because you were never supposed to be my wife, and now you're my greatest weakness. Amal's breath caught. She wasn't just a mistake. She was a target. Amal's pulse raced. Khalid's words echoed in her mind. You were never supposed to be my wife, and now you're my greatest weakness. She squared her shoulders. If I'm in danger, I deserve to know why. Khalid exhaled, his gaze locked onto hers. Then finally he spoke. My marriage to Layla wasn't just about love or family honor, he admitted. It was a business deal, one that would have merged two of the most powerful empires in Dubai. Amal's stomach dropped. And now that I've taken her place. His jaw tightened. There are people who want you gone. People who will do anything to force me into that marriage again. Meanwhile, across the city, Layla's family wasn't backing down. Sheikh Hassan's voice was ice-cold as he spoke into the phone. She is a nobody, an African maid who does not belong in our world. His fingers tapped against the armrest. Make her disappear. Quietly. A voice on the other end responded. Consider it done. The order had been given, and Amal had no idea what was coming. Later that night, Amal stepped outside, needing air. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across the marble courtyard. Then she heard it. A whisper. You should leave while you still can. She spun around, only to see a masked figure standing a few feet away. Her heart pounded. Who are you? The figure took a step closer. This is your only warning. Walk away from Khalid Al-Fayed, or you won't walk away at all. Before she could scream, the figure vanished into the night. Terror gripped her. This wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. She didn't hesitate. She ran straight to Khalid's office. Khalid, she gasped, gripping the doorframe. Someone was here. They threatened me. His entire body went still. Then, in a flash, he was in front of her, gripping her arms. What did they say? Amal swallowed hard. They told me to leave you, or I'd be killed. Something snapped in Khalid's gaze. His grip tightened ever so slightly. No one threatens what's mine, he said, his voice dangerously low. Amal's breath hitched. Not who, but what? Did he see her as nothing more than a possession? Or was this something more? Amal had never seen him like this. Khalid's entire demeanor changed the moment she told him about the threat. His body tensed, his knuckles turning white around his phone. He turned away from her, dialing a number. His voice was sharp, filled with barely controlled rage. Find out who got past my security. I want names. And when you find them, make sure they regret it. Amal shivered. This wasn't just a man protecting his wife. This was a powerful billionaire declaring war. The next morning, Khalid took his protection to another level. You're not leaving this house, he announced. Not until I say it's safe. Amal's jaw dropped. You can't just keep me locked up. His dark eyes met hers. Watch me. The door shut behind him, and the sound of locks clicking into place made her heart race. This wasn't protection. This was captivity. Meanwhile, Layla was far from done. She met with a man in an upscale Dubai lounge, one with a reputation for making problems disappear. She's still alive, Layla said, swirling her wine glass. That's unacceptable. The man smirked. Consider it handled. Layla leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. She won't live to see another sunrise. Amal refused to sit and wait for danger to come. She had one chance. One person she still trusted. She picked up the hidden phone she had taken from one of the housemaids and dialed quickly. Please, she whispered. I need your help to get out of here. The voice on the other end hesitated.
Then,
Meet me in the West Wing at midnight. Relief washed over her. But she had no idea. The person on the other end had already betrayed her. And Khalid would never forgive what she was about to do. Amal's heart pounded as she clutched the phone. She had made the call. The plan was in motion. At midnight, she would be free. But deep down, a small voice whispered, was she running from Khalid or from her own feelings? She silenced the thought. It didn't matter. If she stayed, she would never be safe. The house was eerily quiet. Amal moved cautiously, her pulse racing. She reached the West Wing, her eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor. And then she saw him, her trusted friend, the only person she believed would help her. But instead of leading her to safety, he stepped aside, revealing Khalid standing behind him. Amal's breath caught. You really thought you could escape me? Khalid's voice was low, deadly. Her stomach twisted. He knew. He knew all along. Khalid dragged her inside his office, slamming the door shut. His eyes burned with something dark, rage, betrayal, and something even more dangerous. Possession. You had one chance to trust me, he said coldly. And you threw it away. Amal yanked her arm back. I'm not your prisoner, Khalid. His jaw clenched. No, you're my wife. And you will stay where I can protect you. She swallowed hard, her heart hammering. You mean control me? He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Tell me, are you afraid of me, Amal? Silence. Yes, she was. But not for the reason he thought. She was afraid of what she felt when he was this close. While Khalid and Amal fought inside, outside the estate, danger lurked in the darkness. A gunman positioned himself, aiming straight at the office window. A smirk curled his lips. Time's up, Mrs. Al-Fayed. His finger tightened on the trigger. A single moment. That's all it took for everything to change. As Khalid stood inches from Amal, his fury barely contained, a faint red flickered across his chest. Amal's eyes widened. Khalid.
Bang.
Glass shattered. The force of the bullet sent Khalid crashing into Amal. A sharp pain exploded in her shoulder as they hit the floor. The sound of guards shouting filled the air. She barely registered Khalid's voice, rough with panic. Amal, stay with me. Her vision blurred. And then, darkness. Khalid Al-Fayed had never felt powerless. Not until now. Amal lay inside the hospital room, unconscious. The bullet had grazed her shoulder, but it was the sight of her covered in blood that had nearly broken him. His men stood before him, stiff with fear.
Who did this?
His voice was lethal, sending a chill through the air. A guard hesitated. We believe Layla's family ordered the hit, sir. Khalid's grip tightened around his phone. Then they've made their last mistake. Layla smiled as she answered the call. Is she dead? She asked, her tone casual. A pause. Then bad news. Her fingers tightened around the glass. What do you mean, she survived? She exhaled sharply. This wasn't over. If Khalid thought he could just choose Amal over her, he was wrong. She would make sure Amal disappeared for good. When Amal woke, her body ached, and her mind swam with memories of the attack. Then she saw him. Khalid sat beside her, his usually sharp features lined with something foreign worry. You almost died, he said, his voice rough. She swallowed. I thought you wanted me to stay.
His jaw clenched.
I do. His hand brushed against hers. Amal's breath caught. I won't let them take you from me. His voice dropped to a whisper. It wasn't just a promise. It was a warning. She wasn't sure which terrified her more, Layla's threats, or the way Khalid looked at her now, like he would never let her go. Amal barely had time to process what was happening before she found herself inside a car with Khalid. The city lights faded behind them as they drove into the vast, golden desert. She turned to him. Where are we going? Khalid's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. Somewhere they can't reach you. Her stomach twisted. So, I'm a prisoner again? He didn't look at her, but his voice was firm.
No.
You're under my protection. There's a difference. Amal wasn't sure she believed him. Hours later, they arrived at a stunning desert retreat. The villa was isolated, surrounded by miles of sand. It was beautiful and terrifying. No one could find her here. Not Layla. Not her family. Not even Amal herself. She turned to Khalid. How long are we staying? His dark eyes locked onto hers. Until it's safe. But something in his voice told her he might never let her leave. Days passed. The silence between them grew heavy, charged with something neither wanted to name. One night, Amal stepped onto the terrace, lost in thought. She didn't hear Khalid approach until he was right behind her. You should be resting, he said softly. She turned, meeting his gaze. I can't sleep. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Because you're afraid of me? No, she admitted. Because I don't trust what I feel around you. He stepped closer. The desert breeze carried his scent, sandalwood and danger. You think I'm the villain in your story, he murmured. But what if I'm the only one keeping you alive? She swallowed. And what if I don't want to be kept? His hand lifted, fingers brushing her cheek. Then convince me to let you go. She couldn't, because, in that moment, she wasn't sure she wanted to leave. While Amal struggled with her feelings, Layla was preparing her final move. Her contact had delivered something even better than a hitman. A secret about Khalid. Something that, once revealed, would destroy him forever. She traced her fingers over the document, smiling. If she couldn't have Khalid, no one could. There were things Khalid had never spoken of. Secrets buried so deep, even he refused to acknowledge them. But now, those secrets were crawling to the surface. And if Amal ever found out, she might run, and this time, he wouldn't stop her. Because she wouldn't be running from danger. She would be running from him. Layla had played many games, but this was her masterpiece. She slid the document across the table. This is what you need. The official skimmed through it, his expression darkening. This is dangerous information, he muttered. Layla's smile didn't waver. It's the truth. And once it comes out, Khalid Al-Fayed will no longer be untouchable. The man sighed. If this leaks, his empire will collapse. Layla leaned in. That's the idea. The news hit like an earthquake. Khalid's name was everywhere. Accusations. Corruption. A secret scandal buried for years. Amal's breath hitched as she read the details. She turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway, watching her. You knew, she whispered. Khalid's face was unreadable. Who told you? Her heart pounded. Is it true? Silence. A silence heavier than anything she had ever known. Then, his answer. Yes. Her whole body trembled. You lied to me. I protected you. His voice was calm, but there was something desperate in his eyes. You controlled me, she snapped. Just like everyone else in my life. She turned toward the door. I'm leaving. Khalid's jaw clenched. You won't make it past the gates. She froze. He wasn't threatening her. He was warning her. Because now, she wasn't just his wife. She was the one person in the world who could destroy him. And that made her the most dangerous piece in this game. She had fought so hard to escape him. But the cruelest twist of fate? She wasn't sure she wanted to anymore. Because somewhere in the madness, in the danger, in the lies, she had fallen for him. And now, she had to decide, would she stand by his side? Or would she be the one to bring him down? The weight of the truth pressed down on her. Khalid was not the man she thought he was. And yet, she couldn't forget the way he had protected her. The way his touch set her skin on fire. The way his eyes told her that she was the only weakness he had ever allowed himself to have. She had two choices. Walk away and expose him. Or stay and risk becoming part of his dark world. Her fingers curled around her wedding ring. One decision. That was all it would take to change everything. Khalid had built an empire that no one could touch. Until now. The scandal Layla unleashed had torn through his world like wildfire. His businesses were under investigation. His allies were turning their backs. And worst of all, Amal knew. He had seen the way she looked at him. Like he was a stranger. Like she was realizing that she might have married a monster. For the first time in his life, Khalid felt something he had never known before.
Fear.
Because if he lost her, none of this power would matter anymore. Layla was done playing games. Khalid may have survived the scandal, but she had one last card to play. One that would destroy him forever. She slid a file across the table. Make sure this reaches Amal. The man smirked. What's in it? Layla leaned forward. The truth about how Khalid really became a billionaire. And once Amal saw it, she would never forgive him. The envelope arrived at sunset. No name. No sender. Just a stack of documents and a single note. He's been lying to you from the very beginning. As she flipped through the pages, her hands shook. This wasn't just corruption. It was something darker. Something that explained everything. Why Khalid was so ruthless. Why he had married her so suddenly. Why he never intended to let her go. Amal gasped, covering her mouth as the final page revealed the truth. And, at that exact moment, the door burst open. Khalid stood there, his expression unreadable. You know, he said quietly. Amal's eyes burned with tears. How could you do this to me? Silence. Then, in a voice colder than she had ever heard, he spoke. I told you, Amal. I don't lose what's mine. She couldn't breathe. The words on the paper blurred, but the truth was crystal clear. Khalid had orchestrated everything. Their marriage, her entrapment, even her love for him, manipulated, controlled. She looked up, her voice shaking. It was all a game to you, wasn't it?
His jaw tightened. No.
Then tell me the truth. She held up the papers. Tell me why my entire life has been a lie. Khalid stared at her, his dark eyes unreadable. Then finally he spoke. Because I had no choice. Years ago, Khalid Al-Fayed was nothing. Not a billionaire. Not a tycoon. Just an ambitious man drowning in desperation. Then an opportunity came. A deal with a man who owned half the city's underworld. A deal that required one thing. A marriage that would secure power. Amal's father owed a debt. A life-altering, world-shattering debt. And Khalid had paid it. In exchange, he had claimed her. Her entire existence in his world had been nothing but a transaction. A business deal. Amal's voice cracked. You bought me? Khalid's fists clenched. It wasn't like that. She let out a bitter laugh. Then what was it? Silence. Because there was no way to soften the truth. She had fallen for a man who had owned her before she ever knew his name. Tears burned her eyes. I trusted you. Khalid exhaled sharply, stepping forward. I never meant for you to find out like this. She shook her head. Did you ever love me? Or was that part of the deal too? Something flickered in his gaze. Something dangerous. You think I don't love you? His voice was low, almost a whisper. Amal, I have killed for you. She froze. Her breath hitched.
What?
Khalid's expression didn't change. You don't want to know the things I've done to keep you. A shiver ran down her spine. This wasn't just about money. This was obsession. And now she was trapped in it. Layla had played her final move, and she was sure she had won. Khalid's empire was crumbling. Amal had seen the truth. But what she didn't expect was the rage she had just unleashed. Her phone buzzed. A message. You think you've won, Layla. You have no idea who you've just crossed. Her blood ran cold. Because she knew Khalid. And if there was one thing he didn't forgive, it was betrayal.